Welcome to the Distilled Spirits Council Ask the Expert webinar series. I'm Caleb Ross, Director of Membership at the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, also known as Discus. We are recording this webinar so that it will be available later uh, for the public. Discus YouTube channel. Before I welcome today's speakers, we open each webinar with a reminder of the Discus antitrust policy. What we want to do is refrain from discussing or exchanging information relating to pricing, marketing or sales plans, costs or confidential plans regarding output or production, boycotting another company, not recruiting or hiring each other's employees or salaries, wages, or benefits, any other competitively sensitive or proprietary business information. Discus is the leading voice and advocate for our members in the distilled spirits industry overall. And Discus provides a wealth of resources and services, including this webinar series that aims to educate and to share relevant trends, ideas, resources, discussions, and opportunities. Our recent webinars have included e-commerce featuring Reserve Bar and DTC e-commerce, specifically featuring Speakeasy, consumer foot traffic with Placer AI, sustainable closures featuring Talus, global regulatory compliance tips from Trace One, tips for accessing capital and expertise with Pronghorn industry experts, and a lot more. We're lucky to have great partner members like NIQ today. And with that housekeeping taken care of, I want to welcome our speaker for today's webinar, Unveiling Trends in the U.S. Liquor Market. John is the Vice President of Bev AI Thought Leadership at Nielsen IQ, and Kaylee is the Director of Bev AI through leadership also at NIQ. Welcome, John and Kaylee.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Caleb, for getting us kicked off today. John, do we want to give a little background on ourselves?
Yeah,
Okay.
let's do that.
I don't think you're coming out of left field. Yeah. Caleb gave a great introduction to us, but my name is Kaylee Therialt. I have been with NIQ for the past 9 or so years, and the most recent, almost 5 now, focused on the beverage alcohol industry. So I joined a really unique time when it was just before COVID, like January of 2020. So a lot of things have happened over my course in beverage alcohol, and it's been a really exciting time frame. And I think what we have to talk about today is one of the more exciting things to share. So, and I'm happy to be joined by John today.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for that, Kaylee. And Caleb, thank you for the send-off, getting us started. I kind of felt for a moment there like I should have brought my attorney with me, but you did a really good job of navigating us through that. So thank you so much. John Berg, I've been with NIQ for about 3 years now, or coming up on 3 years pretty soon. I've been in beverage alcohol for about the last 20 years, and I was a proud member of the Discus Statistics Committee for a couple of years because I worked at LVMH, Moet Hennessy, doing commercial insights there. Previous to that, I worked at Bacardi USA and had a similar position there. Started my career at Coors Brewing, so beer, wine, and spirits across the board, but always been an NIQ client. And now I'm a proud member of the thought leadership team for NIQ. So we're, as you'll see here as we go through today, we're going to have a discussion-based presentation and really hope you guys enjoy it. So with that, Kaylee, should we kick off?
Yeah,
Kaylee.
one other note. Oh, go ahead, Caleb.
Sorry, one more thing, and I just want to just reiterate that you can use the raise your hand icon at the top of your screen or put your questions in the chat. And once we see the questions, Luis or myself will be able to take those questions and send them off to Kaylee and John for answering. John, Kaylee, over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Caleb. That's a great call out. And then our contact information is on this slide, and Caleb will share it out afterwards. So if you do have questions following this and you get more time to think about all the cool stuff we're going to show in the Liquor channel, definitely feel free to reach out to us. But today we've got a shortened agenda here, but a lot of data and insights to get through. We're going to start out with what's new. We did a couple of Liquor channel enhancements, but we won't beat on those too hard. And then we'll jump right into beverage alcohol for performance, look at an update across how Bevel is doing across all of the channels that we track at NIQ, looking at beer, wine, and spirits. And then we'll do a deeper dive into the liquor open state channel that we've just enhanced, and do a deeper dive into that and really try to identify where some declines might be coming from and some unique opportunities. And then we'll look at what's next for the industry. What do we expect to see for the remainder of the year? Things along those lines. So a lot here, but again, ask questions as we go through. We are more than happy to answer them. So starting out with what's new, a few weeks ago, we just released our total US liquor open state. And I know that is a mouthful, but we sort of matched up the naming convention to some of our other channels. But what that means is that we cover all open states for the liquor channel across the United States. On the map that's shown here, that's everything in that light blue color. So we're really excited that we have this like fully projected coverage of these open states, with again the ability to add in that NABCA data if somebody does want to see that. But today's focus will be on liquor open states only. Now, the other thing I want to call out is that we will look at a couple of state lines towards the end of the presentation, and we have 8 state lines available: California, Colorado, Texas, Florida, New York, New Jersey, and one Massachusetts, I believe. And those are all the states that are outlined here that we can dive a little bit deeper to try to understand how trends might be different within these states. And we'll definitely look at those towards the end of the deck. So let's go ahead and dive into that beverage alcohol performance update. John, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was a great setup, Kaylee. It also, you saw on that slide Kaylee was showing you the fact that we really want to be insights driven. I mean, the reporting is fantastic there, and it really comes to life with each of you, of course, as you're going through it. But what really drives us is taking a look at what it means from an insights perspective. And so it doesn't matter what category you're in, but since we're in beverage alcohol, we absolutely want to drive from the consumer point of view. We've seen a lot of change, of course, especially since COVID. I mean, the beverage alcohol business has really changed so very much. But the drivers continue to be based in consumer activity. And so there's 6 key consumer activity areas or impact areas that we see as really important for the rest of the year and going into next year as well. Moderation of consumption, of course, you really have to pay attention to this because it's an important point that it is changing with all consumers. Health and wellness is part of that moderation of consumption, but it's really its own area if you think about it, especially from the point of view of products that cater to health and wellness. You can't get away from reading the Wall Street Journal or watching the TV, even if for a few minutes, and not understand the impact of inflation and retail pricing. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We constantly talk about premiumization, and it's a really important part of the Discus member profile, getting into the premiumization routines that consumers have. And then we're seeing a lot of change as far as usage occasions. The RTD proliferation has really driven a lot of that. We're going to be talking a bit more about how that is really taking place and where we see that going. And of course, you have other opportunities that consumers have for those same occasions, things like cannabis, THC, Delta 9s, et cetera, that are really important. So kind of wanted to give you a jumping off point as far as consumer drivers, because as we go through some of this material, you're going to say, why is that happening? And this is really the linkage to the why, I think, Kaylee. So maybe we should take a look at some of the top line numbers.
Yeah. Looking at some of the trends with our most recent, it looks like something popped into the chat, but with our most recent update to that liquor channel enhancement, we added an additional $23 billion in coverage, which is really significant. So historically, you might have seen us report out, a $90 billion number in the off-premise. reminding everybody that our off-premise channels will cover anything from food to mass to drug to dollar to convenience channels, liquor stores, military a little bit, really the vast majority of all those off-premise outlets. And with that, we're seeing $111 billion of sales across total alcohol, inclusive of beer, wine, spirits, RTD, the whole realm of products. And when we look at that trended versus last year, we're seeing sales about flat, down a percentage point here, but relatively a positive story when we think about it from the dollar side of things, where we know volumes are really where more of the focus is going to be in trying to determine what's a decliner. And if we look at the next slide and break down our three mega categories, beer, spirits, and wine, we can see that a lot of the trends are defined by this disparity between value and volume, with values in beer and wine performing a little bit better and volume facing more of those declines. And there's a lot that's happening there uniquely within beer and wine. Beer has faced some increase in price that are still those factors are still lingering around. Wine is more so facing some consumer struggles with recruitment and things like that. But if we focus on that spirits in the middle there, we can see that spirits dollars look relatively positive still, up 0.3%, and volume feels very healthy. But we're starting to see a lot of impacts coming in from the ready to drink world that John alluded to. And when we talk about ready to drinks throughout the deck, we'll try to be very clear on what exactly we're referring to. But if we say total RTD, that'll be inclusive of everything malt-based, spirits-based, and wine-based from a canned cocktail perspective. But I think that switches up the trends a little bit, doesn't it, John, when we exclude those RTDs?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and that's a really good segue. I'm so glad you brought up the fact that our definition or the way we talk about ready-to-drink products is holistic, and the reason for that is that's how consumers view the ready-to-drink segment or subsegment, depending on how you want to talk about it. They don't necessarily understand the base ingredient that's in that product, whether it's a malt, a wine, or spirits, as Kaylee said. And so when we take out all of those RTD products from beer, from spirits, and from wine, now you start to see a little bit different story, especially in the case of spirits when it comes to growth rate. So you can see where the value and the volume is for each one of those super categories with RTD removed. So basically what we're doing here is treating the ready to drink category as its own category or as a fourth category. And you see that in the media quite a bit as well, where they'll actually call it out now as the fourth category, which is fine. But you always have to maybe look under the hood a little bit just to kind of make sure that the definitions are the same. So in our case, it's literally everything that's RTD orientated and coming in now at about 11% share of total alcohol. But let's take a look at that view from a channel perspective, right, Keely?
Yeah, so uniquely to Bevel, we've got our different channels that we track, and there's some differences in growth rates that we wanted to take a peek at here, but a lot of that ready to drink trend is really being driven by the convenience channel. And convenience stores are finding a lot of success in being able to have those cold spaces for a lot of malt-based, spirit-based, and wine-based options. And that's driving up overall alcohol trends within that channel up 1%. Mass merch, dollar club, those kind of remaining all other channels that are important to sales but represent a much smaller portion, also seeing some growth year over year, but relatively small and stable. Where the grocery channel and our liquor channel that we're looking at are both facing some declines. Grocery channel, not declining too bad, but really where we want to focus is what might be driving some of those declines within that liquor channel, where we're seeing, 3.4% dollars sales down versus a year ago. And what we'll show over the next several slides is that the convenience channel and the liquor channel can be very similar in the way that they're shopped, the way that the channel is selected, things like that. but we're seeing a difference in trends. And so trying to dissect what might be happening there, especially knowing that spirits is a destination in the liquor channel and spirits is doing
Oh, yeah.
relatively well, we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive to try to understand what we can look to do to, reverse that declining trend, and what we can learn about the liquor channel and combat, some of that convenience shifting.
I'm really glad you mentioned that about the liquor channel being that destination purchase. And we talk about this all the time. And if you want to run your own little research experiment, stand in front of a liquor store and you'll notice very few, if any, I challenge you to find anybody that walks out without making a purchase. That is, definitely one of the tests I would give to call it a destination purchase. Now, you put that up against like a grocery channel purchase. Somebody might walk down the beverage alcohol aisle and they might not. They could be in the store for a different kind of shopping trip. But it's that liquor store destination purchase that really drives a lot of the we call it a spirit safari. It's the people who are going into the store and they have a planned purchase in mind, as you're going to see coming up, but that the rest of the product assortment is so important to them. We're going to talk about some of those drivers, but you can see how unique the liquor store is. And here we're comparing it to the grocery store as far as what the preference type is, or the go-to channel that somebody would step into. And as a comparison point, what we've done here is we did that same routine where we pulled ready to drinks out and made that channel comparison. And Kaylee set us up really well with kind of understanding where that top line change is coming from by channel. But if you take a look at some of the numbers here for beer, for spirits and wine, you start to understand where the really the go-to channels are for each one of the categories. And certainly there's elements of each of these that are really important, and there's elements that are or parts of the channels, I should say, that are really growing too, especially for spirits. We're starting to see a lot more movement in that convenience channel. That's happening with wine as well. So the days of one type of channel shopping for a particular product are pretty much starting to evaporate as consumers are getting or shoppers are getting very comfortable with going to multiple channels, making sure that they're sourcing the products that they're looking for. And it gets really interesting as far as when we start to look at some of the details, right, Kaylee?
Yeah, if we take a look through that shopper lens, I think historically and across all categories, we think that price is just a number one driver for a lot of consumers. It's all about price, making sure you have the right price, and most conversations revolve around price again. But what we see more and more, and this is over the past 2 years now, we've seen that convenient location is actually the number one driver for why a shopper is choosing a store, regardless of channel here, when making that beverage alcohol purchase. So we've typically shown that total US level with convenient location being the driver, but we found that within the convenience channel, the liquor channel, and grocery channel, having that convenient location is the number one driver for that beverage alcohol purchasing. And then if we look down a little bit further, we can also see that quick in and out is one that pops up across all four of these as well. And so those consumers that are really, or those shoppers that are really time starved, and they might be on the way to the party, and so they're picking up their purchase from that specific channel and they're headed right to where they want to consume those products. So the ease of purchasing and the ability to get in and out of the store is top of mind, especially, I mean, when you're probably running late as it is, if you're anything like me. But what I do want to call out here is that price is still important. Having low prices in some instances and having clear pricing is still important for consumers. It's just not that number one driver. It's a combination of these different considerations that these shoppers take into account when they're, looking to make that destination purchase, whether it be for their beer purchase, their wine purchase, their spirit purchase, or even those RTDs. And RTDs have sort of thrown, I would think, a loop into a lot of store choice consideration because of the kind of confusing distribution and the way that they're
Yeah.
available to be sold in those channels.
Yeah, that's a great point about pricing, and I'm really glad that you brought that up to talk about it as still being important, but it's almost like it's an expectation, isn't it? For
Mhm.
some of those channels that people know their liquor store, their food store, kind of know what the pricing is already, and so that speed to purchase becomes so important. And this is one of the core drivers around that, which is plan purchase. And we talk about this all the time. I'm always a little bit surprised when somebody has a slightly different point of view on this and says that, everything or most things tend to be bought on impulse. It's really not true. The plan purchase is very high in beverage alcohol. So in other words, you go to the store with a plan, you go online to make a purchase with a plan. It's quite a bit different than the on-premise where we see a lot of suggestive selling, especially from the standpoint of bartenders making a recommendation. Off-premise is not that game. Off-premise tends to be that planned purchase, and especially in that liquor channel, being since it is a destination purchase, you came in there for a reason, and that reason probably gets played out, into that 70-80% of the time. And it's really important for us to kind of understand that because there are a lot of drivers for that, and maybe we can take a look at some of those drivers here. The we'll call it habit, and this comes from our bases-driven omni shopper fundamentals. So we're able to understand what the shopper was actually thinking, or what they're telling us they were thinking when they're in store. So the liquor store channel tends to over-index for that habit purchase. So it's that purchase that is being made probably several times a year, maybe quite a bit more often than that, depending on what that product is. But you can see some of these other influencers of that purchase, whether that purchase is planned or reminded or impulse, exploring the aisle, checking pricing, temperature state, or was the product just on deal, and how that resonates. So something like temperature state resonates pretty significantly in the convenience channel, of course. It resonates other places as well too, just to varying degrees. And it's important for us from a supplier standpoint to at least acknowledge what it is that we need to pay attention to as we start getting into uh, liquor store channel merchandising versus grocery or convenience merchandising as well. So that kind of helps give you a few pointers into what's going on in these particular channel environments. But maybe we should take a little bit of time and kind of go over the entire open state, right, Kaylee?
Yeah, the one thing I always think of, John, with that habit purchase in the liquor channel is from
Oh,
your shopper research days, and the person that it was such a habit they could probably do it blindfolded and grab their item off the shelf. They knew exactly where it was. Very strong habit purchasing there.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
The shopper videos are great to watch that and kind of understand what people do from a habit can even be disrupted by a simple shelf set change. And that's why you do find, especially in the liquor store channel, shoppers get really annoyed after some of these resets because where's my product? Now I have to relocate it and I'm not on autopilot. It's a great point.
yeah. Cool. So yeah, now we can dive into that liquor channel a little bit deeper. But first, I wanted to level set us on how many stores we're talking about within our total liquor world and our total purchasing for beverage alcohol. And through our TD Links, which is really just a tool where we track outlet locations across the on and off premise. With this slide specifically looking at that off premise channel. So all of those channels I highlighted in the beginning, with all of that, there are 246,000 outlets across the US to legally purchase beer or wine or spirits. We obviously know that wine is going to be a little bit less than this number and spirits is going to be a lot less than this total number. But we're just trying to give that total view of how many stores are across and available to purchase alcohol at. The convenience channel then is about 126,000 stores to purchase, again, beer or wine or spirits, notably noting that beer is the largest one to be purchased in that convenience channel legally. And then our liquor channel represents about 48,000 stores across the United States. So there's definitely a much smaller outlet availability for that liquor channel than there is the convenience channel, which might lean into some of those different trends that we were seeing, and knowing that consumers are reaching towards the outlets where they can get quickly in and out and it's a convenient location. There's definitely more convenience locations and outlets to select from versus that liquor channel or liquor outlet. Now, if we break that down between independents and chains, we can see that the majority, 80%, represent independent outlets and about 20% are representing chains. And if we break that down between open states and control states, the majority, again, are open states, because we know in control states, if it's state-run stores, they're a little bit fewer and far to find. So thinking about this for our open liquor or liquor open state channel, we're talking about 78% of those 48,000 stores. So a lot of outlets to be able to purchase beer, wine, or spirits.
And from a supplier point of view, that's a lot to manage, isn't it? I mean, you've got a lot of outlets to cover with the distributor partners, and really making sure that the programs and the all the marketing work gets done. That's not easy to do. That's not one size fits all. That's going to a lot of different locations with a lot of different route to market tactics that have to occur. It's really kind of staggering when you think about how many outlets there really are.
There are a lot, which might lend into some of these trends that I think we're seeing, knowing that the convenience channel has been a steady driver of dollar sales for total beverage alcohol. If we break that down across the different categories, we're actually seeing spirits and wine showing some higher growth rates, knowing that they are on a smaller base, so that growth is going to seem a little bit larger. But the convenience channel is evolving to include more wine and spirits items in their sets where they're legally able to sell those, especially when we think about some of those RTD options. So that's driving a pretty significant growth too within the convenience channel. On the food side of things, things are relatively stable, wine facing some declines, not surprisingly. And if we focus on that center where we have our liquor open state measurement across beer, wine, spirits in that fourth RTD category, we're seeing declines across those three mega categories. And it can be a little bit of concern, but I think a lot of what we're going to get into will help to dissect that a bit more. And RTD's still showing positive growth there, but the sets within these liquor stores are very large, and so optimizing those might help out with some of the declines that are being faced, but definitely some varying trends in the liquor stores compared to those convenience outlets.
Yeah.
Breaking things down a little bit more, I mentioned that we do see higher UPC counts, so there's about 32% more UPCs available within that liquor store channel or within a liquor store compared to the average food or grocery store. So there's a lot more selection, which again is why consumers lean into it when they're trying to make that destination purchase. They're more likely to find the item potentially if it's a little more niche or has a little bit less distribution. And on the flip side of that, we do see higher velocities coming across since shoppers are leaning into the liquor store for those destination purchases, potentially looking to make some of those more premium purchases as well. It's not surprising that we see a greater dollar per store, selling metric compared to that traditional food outlet. So just some quick, fast facts for us to think about. There's a lot of upside with that liquor channel, despite those declines that are being faced.
Yeah, and you and I have talked to a lot of liquor store owners or people that make the decisions for that liquor store channel, and they're just inundated with the new UPCs that are coming through, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But you just did a great job, I think, of setting that up so that we can understand that there's such a deep inventory in the liquor store channel, and it's not easy to navigate. And one of the core drivers, especially of the new items, has been RTD. And we said we were going to talk quite a bit about that, or we were going to at least interject RTD into the conversation so you could get a sense of where it is a differentiator. So this particular view that you're looking at right now is very similar to the total beverage alcohol view that we looked at, but now we're concentrated on just the liquor open states. And so here, that same thing is happening from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, where we're looking at an embedded view on the left-hand side with RTD in beer, in wine, in spirits, but on the right-hand side, we've extracted it. And you can see that all the categories are definitely in a negative growth mode. And even RTD, interestingly enough, is looking for volume. So the volume metrics of the business right now are definitely struggling. The dollar sales for RTD is still in positive growth mode. A lot of that has to do with pricing changes that have happened. And if we take a look at the next slide, we can kind of get a sense of, especially in the liquor store channel, where pricing is headed. So a lot of this is driven by trying to increase foot traffic. And in the liquor store channel, since it is a destination purchase, it's really important to create those brands or those packages that are going to drive foot traffic into the store. And when the volumetrics are softening a little bit traditionally, we've seen this happen where businesses need to make those discounts to get people coming into their location, making that destination purchase, and then we've got our fingers crossed, of course, that we get that extra purchase or that incremental purchase. But it's not the same in every single category. And Kaylee, I think maybe we can talk a little bit about what categories are doing well and which ones aren't.
Yeah, we know that across the total, beverage alcohol landscape, there are some popular categories right now, and then there are a little bit less popular of categories. And if we break it down between those winners and laggers here, on that growth side, we know that non-alc has been a huge driver. Non-alc beer isn't specifically called out on this slide, but non-alc spirits, wine, and beer have all been steady drivers, though a little bit on the smaller side from an absolute standpoint. The other two categories here, John, you talked about that growth in ready-to-drink dollars, and if we break that down, wine cocktails performing very well, spirits, RTDs also growing, and a little bit further down on the growth side, we see those flavored malt beverages driving some growth, all very positive. And the one RTD segment that is missing from the growth side, not surprisingly, are those hard seltzers that are facing some pretty significant declines and likely driving a bigger impact on the volume side of things as well for ready to drinks. Other growth drivers in the liquor channel, tequila has especially been important over the past several years and will continue to be a driver. I think we still see a lot of celebrity tequilas coming into that space too, that are driving some growth. But the different tequila types is something that consumers are definitely exploring. Traditionally, we think about flavors as fruity and fun and a little bit different, but what we find with tequila is that some of the different aging techniques and barrel finishes are also going to contribute to um, differences in, the flavors that come through in that tequila experience, that drinking experience. So a lot of growth there, and I think we'll continue to see that. And then, not surprising, import beer also driving pretty significant growth within that liquor channel environment. Other
Hey,
categories. Oh, go ahead, John.
no, keep going. I was just going to say, don't you think a lot of that the growth categories also have a lean in for recruitment? Maybe Gen Z are trying some of those things that are growing. Maybe not all of them. Some of them, as you mentioned, are a trade-off too. You mentioned the fact that seltzer's trading off, maybe to FMBs or spirit space, but looks like there might be some recruitment happening there too.
Definitely some strong recruitment, especially among those LDA Gen Z, those 21 plus Gen Z that um, we do take a deeper dive into and some of the other work that we've done. So let us know if anybody's interested in that. But Gen Z has been a little bit of a struggle from a recruitment standpoint, and these categories have proved to do well with them. So that is likely, one of the many drivers of these segments within the liquor channel, I think.
I had a
Um,
question, Kaylee.
yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that Gen Z population kind of gearing towards the uptick in the non-alc spirits at
Yeah,
all?
so our LDA Gen Z drinkers are relatively small. They represent about 8% of overall buying households for beverage alcohol. And we do see them having a stronger affinity towards those non-alcohol products. But when we look at it from like an absolute dollar standpoint, we still see that those older generations are driving a lot of the dollar sales
Hmm.
for
Okay.
non-alcohol products. Yeah, Gen X and millennials are big, um, are definitely leaning into that. We have a whole nother update too on non-alcohol stuff. John and I could talk for hours about all of these different topics. But non-alcs are super unique in that many consumers, despite their generation, are adding those products into their repertoires and having them as an alternative for a drinking occasion where they previously may have consumed some alcohol, or they're just looking to cut back a little bit and moderate, as John touched on in the beginning. But there's a lot happening in that world too. Um, Lots going on across beverage alcohol, I think. Looking at these decliners really quickly, and then we'll dive into some item trends that John talked about previously. Wine, both still and sparkling, facing some declines in the liquor channel. And then craft beer, domestic beer. We know that beer isn't as, that convenience channel is more of the destination for beer, but facing
Yeah.
some declines within that liquor channel environment. And then rum and cognac are two categories that are struggling at the total US level. So it's no surprise that when we look within that liquor channel, they're facing some additional declines. Um, John talked about all of the item trends that are happening. We know the liquor channel environment is where a lot of UPCs are at. It's a destination for all of these categories. And over the past few years, we've heard from our retailer partners that it's been a little bit overwhelming with all of the innovation that's come into the space where they're reviewing items like on a daily basis, like multiple items. I think just within the ready to drink world, there were over 1,000 UPC launches last year. So it's a very, very crazy environment when it comes to innovation. And innovation is definitely a driver within the industry and very much important. But what we're starting to see is that um, the UPC selling are starting to slow. Those counts are dropping a little bit as retailers are making some optimization decisions for their shelf sets. They might be cutting back on, those RTD items are starting to decline and not as many are being launched year over year. But definitely the UPC selling are slowing a little bit as consumers get a little more settled into what's currently in their repertoire and maybe not leaning into what's new and different and what's next within the industry.
Yeah, I start to feel every once in a while like I'm the only one that doesn't have an RTD out there, It's uh it feels like if you were a liquor store owner, like Kaylee said, your shoulders must just slump every morning when you look at all the new item submissions that probably come in, and because you have to try to figure out A, is how is this going to fit on the shelf? And B, does my consumer really need it? And what's the trade-off? Because not everything is incremental. As a matter of fact, I would argue most things are not incremental to the total business. And so the the retailer really has an enormous task here to try to weed through all of the UPC submissions and try to make some sense of it all.
Yeah.
John, Kaylee, we have a few questions in the group,
Sure.
and I'm gonna start
Mhm.
with a question from Kelly. She asks, "How are changing consumer tastes, flavors specifically, affecting the increases or decreases in categories?"
The whole we, we actually have a whole commentary that we do on flavors, and I'll be careful not to go too deep into that. But it's a wonderful question area because flavor has equaled innovation for beverage alcohol for a long time. Certainly, packaging has made a difference as well, and even some new categories that have been created along the way have been important. So I'm not trying to negate any of those, but so much of what passes for innovation is flavor. And what we see is, especially in the US, not so much globally, but in the US, flavor is the core driver. You know, we're a flavor nation, and we really rally around flavor. That's why not only has RTD done so well, but so many of the other flavor takeoffs within the spirits categories have done very well. But there is a flavor fatigue or a flavor decay rate that's also tied to that. So in other words, if you have a brand and you keep coming up with new flavors, you should expect probably less ROI or less growth and development from each one of those flavors because consumers are going to have a hard time finding a loyalty. Certainly, there are those veins of loyalty, and we can all point to them with particular flavors. But one of the things that we're seeing is, people are organizations working really hard to try to find what's next in flavor and where we're going to take flavor. And
Yeah.
Kaylee, you might have some viewpoints on that too.
Just to add quickly to it, I think it relates back, Caleb, to your question about Gen Z too, and what might
Yeah.
be driving some of their choices. And we know that the younger generation has grown up with more diverse flavors because of the availability, I think, of flavors. And I'm talking about their total, like whether it's just traditional beverages or snacks or all types of food, flavor has been more and more present, I think, as we've gone on over time. So it's no surprise that flavors continue to be a big driver. And going beyond just some of those basic flavors, like fruity is no longer going to just sell. Something like a strawberry might just be an average one, but mixing up those flavors to be hot and sweet and different combinations and stuff we're seeing come through in a number of different like cocktail trends and stuff. So really
Yeah.
interesting to see how that generation reacts to the flavor innovations as well. It's
Point.
Do
definitely
those
drawing them in.
do those flavors? Sorry, and Kelly has me thinking a little bit more. But do those flavors also coincide with how healthy someone thinks the drink is too, in terms of just buying product? Do you think that is like becoming a driving force? Like I'm not gonna buy a strawberry vodka because they think it's more sugar in the alcohol.
Mm.
Yeah,
I don't know, John, do you have a thought on that?
yeah, I see where you're going with that, and I would say what we've seen from past research is that doesn't necessarily get tied together because especially with the beverage alcohol component in your total life tends to I'm not saying you throw out the wellness aspect, but you definitely would compromise on that a little bit. So in other words, you may be in that moment, you may be willing to have a beverage that has more sugar in it or has an ingredient that's a little more indulgent for you because it is that indulgent moment that is so important for beverage alcohol, especially because what we've seen in some of the research that we've done is people feel like they have to compromise everywhere else in their life, and so many times with beverage alcohol, they will take that moment to give themselves that little guilty pleasure for sure.
Okay. And then we have one more question from Ryan. He asks, how much do the various channels contribute to RTD growth?
Yeah, I think the channel growth is definitely dependent upon one, the alcohol base, and two, the availability. So the convenience channel is definitely the main driver for a lot of those ready to drink items, specifically the malt-based ones. So it was driving a lot for hard seltzers, driving a lot for FMBs. And then where it's legal to sell those wine-based and spirits-based options, it's definitely
Yeah.
a big driver. But we know that the liquor channel is also going to be a driver. In some ways, the liquor channel and the convenience channel act similar depending on their locations. And if they're also selling in that cold box space. But knowing that you can legally sell spirits-based RTDs in any liquor store, I think it definitely helps those products a bit more where for the shopper, they don't know if those products are going to be available in that convenience channel necessarily.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And where spirits like where spirits RTDs can be sold based on the alcohol content, that's changing, and that's really hard to keep up with too. I mean, you almost have to uh, tap into that on a I don't know, on a very regular basis, at least a monthly basis, to actually understand that. So one of the things we talk about is you're going to want to watch that moving forward, because some of the growth may be based exactly on what Kaylee's saying, maybe based more on distribution than anything else.
Kelly had a follow-up. She said, thank you. How are flavors inherent to a spirits, vanilla or caramel and rum, reflective of the changing consumer preference? Could that play into why we're seeing declines in certain spirits?
Yeah, and that's a good clarification. I like that. What happens is it's a consumer expectation. So if you have almost any product you could think of, if you have it in a regular flavor or you have it in a straight flavor that's been around probably for years, in some cases maybe hundreds of years. Now the consumer expectation is what happens when you add flavor to that, because we've got flavor for everything else. And what it starts to do is it starts to fragment a brand, or it starts to fragment a category. And when you do that, you end up bringing in some new shoppers, certainly, but you also end up sometimes losing shoppers from a authenticity standpoint. And so we've actually seen in spirits a trend where people are, and I predict this will happen a little bit more often in the coming years, where they'll be back to basics. And so what I would watch for is, I'm not saying RTD is a cycle. I think it's here to stay for a very long time, but we may see shoppers kind of come back to basics, and that probably won't be flavor driven. That'll probably be base product driven.
Thanks, John. And the questions are coming in, but I'm gonna ask one more question from Hassan, and then I know you guys have a couple
Okay,
more slides to get to before we
sure.
end this webinar. But Hassan asks, what are the dollar amounts for non-alcohol beverages by type, spirits, wine, and beer, and as percentage with respect to main category?
Yeah, so in total, non-alcohol beer, wine, and spirits, those direct alternatives to their alcohol counterparts, represent about $700 billion across the total US in the off-premise. And that number might be slightly 700 million. I'm sorry, I said billion. That number might be slightly underestimated because we know a lot of those
Right.
products do sell direct to consumer that we're not tracking in our traditional outlets. But that 700 million represents about a percent of total beverage alcohol sales. And within that, beer is the largest share of non-alcohol products, representing about 80 to 85% of those non-alcohol sales. But we have a whole deep dive that we just released on Monday that we'd be more than happy to share with you on that too. So let's dive into these final few slides and then we can get back to some more questions. So keep asking. Those are all very,
Sure.
very good questions. In the beginning, I mentioned that we are able to look into 8 key states across those liquor open states for the liquor channel. But today we're going to focus on three of them specifically. We're going to go out to California, up to New Jersey, and then down to Florida on this map here. So we are going to start out first by heading over to California and looking at a deeper dive of those trends. And since John is a resident of California, I'm going to let him speak to this slide.
Yeah, I'm already here doing the California dreaming, although with the wildfires we have, it's not quite so dreamy today, but we're doing the best we can. Uh, yeah, the beautiful part about the way the liquor open states tracking works is we can jump into the regional differences, and that can be pretty specific, you know, by state, as Kaylee mentioned, but one of the things that's happening in California, of course, is it's such an important place for imported beer. So a lot of the sales for imported beer are have a higher growth rate here, or have a little bit more amplification. Of course, as you can imagine from a demographic perspective, perfect place for tequila and some of the other agave products have always been popular here and have continued to proliferate. But the one to watch probably is the spirits ready to drink products. And there's such a proliferation of those here. But as we were talking about earlier, a lot of it is driven on distribution. And once especially the C-store operators are able to get more of the RTD products that are spirits based, you're going to see some astronomical growth rates, we think, going on here in California. But it's we were talking about flavors before. It's definitely the go-to place for a lot of flavor testing that many suppliers do, and a lot of really unique flavor profiles tend to work here in California as well.
Shifting back to that total view, we're going to head down the shore to New Jersey. And as John highlighted on the last slide, tequila and import beer, not surprising, are big drivers in the liquor channel, and they're definitely important within New Jersey as well in what we're seeing here. But what's really interesting is to see that there are some regional favorites that are thriving here in the spirits space, despite some of those overall category declines that we saw within the liquor channel. Specifically, brandy and rum are finding some pockets of growth within New Jersey, and that's unique compared to that total view. And we wanted to highlight this because you might look at a total channel sometimes and just make an assumption and a blanket statement about, a category facing declines. But if we take a deeper dive and look at that more granular level, regardless of the channel, we can sometimes find some areas of opportunity. And specific to those two categories, it's exciting to see where there might be some growth that's playing into things, and we can get some good learnings out of what might be happening within those two categories specifically if we were to dive a little bit deeper. Cans, definitely important here as well. I think canned cocktails are popular across the United States, but driving pretty significant growth within New Jersey as well.
Sure.
And then headed down to Florida. And John, you've also lived in Florida, so I think this might be a good one for you as well to speak to. Where haven't you lived?
I know. It's funny. We picked those three states to sort of highlight, and I've lived in all three of those states. I'm not really sure how that happened or what that says. But we're in Florida, where every day is a beach day. Even when you live inland, you try to make it a beach day if you can. There's so many different influences going on, and certainly anybody that has lived in Florida, and I lived in South Florida, but if you live there, you understand it is so unique and so different as you travel around the state, and there's the number of different influences are really incredible. But it is an interesting call out that something like still wine would actually have a little bit of growth there, which I thought was really interesting. And it may be, a little bit of an influence of the demographics that are kicking in there. Certainly, demographics are coming into play when it comes to tequila and imported beer for sure. But it's always been a really good state for whiskey, especially Scotch. And so, I would call out Southern Florida for that for sure. So you start to see some, as Kaylee was mentioning when she was talking about New Jersey, you start to see some increases coming in, maybe some counterintuitive areas. And as we talk through all of this and we think through this, remember from a test and learn strategy, it's really important for suppliers to pay attention because if you're going to go out, roll something out, whether it's a particular flavor or a new product design, you want to pay attention to where those growth rates are for sure.
So again, we only focused on three of those states. We've got some extra slides in another deck where we dive into New York and Texas as well and their uniqueness that exists. But let's go ahead and close it out. We've got a few minutes left here on what we expect for the remainder of the year from the liquor channel in total, all of that, and continue to ask questions if you have them. We're definitely happy to answer them.
Yeah, and from a total alcohol standpoint, when we roll up the 52-week sales, so this is looking at every single week and annualizing it. So it is maybe a unique view to what you're looking at, or maybe some of you are doing this on a regular basis as well. It's going to be very, very difficult. I'll go ahead and say probably impossible to show dollar growth for beer and for wine, especially when you take out RTD for the rest of the year. Spirits has a lot riding on Q4, and it's from a gifting perspective and it's from an entertaining perspective. Now, how much of the actual spirits value and volume is retained versus how much of it shifts over to RTDs, that'll remain to be seen. But we're really keeping a close eye on what that Q4 development looks like, right, Kaylee? Because beer has kind of come and gone already with the kind of the circus tent profile of sales. So it peaks in the summer, but it's really important, for spirits and wine here in Q4.
And then one last slide here where we highlight, what we expect in the different trends. I think we've touched on a number of them today across total alcohol with health and wellness, substitutions that are happening with those non-alcohol products, ready to drinks, inflation being a big impact. And we also, at a total company level, just released something around consumers and how they feel about the remainder of the year and where they plan to spend their dollars, because inflation isn't just an impact in the beverage alcohol world, but it's something that's happening across that total store and all prices within the cart. Again, total alcohol facing declines in value, volume. It really reflects the trends that we were seeing. I think for beer and wine and spirits, it's going to be tough to achieve those year-over-year comps that we saw strong growth from last year, but RTDs are going to end up relatively strong. And then, John, within that liquor channel, what are we going to see happen?
Yeah, the liquor channel, a lot of it is riding on what we talked about earlier with price and being able to drive traffic into the stores, because that's when you're a destination purchase, channel, that's really pivotal. And the liquor channel is also ramping up. My local liquor store went from 4 feet of non-alcohol product to 16 feet of non-alcohol product. Now, the merchandising is not stellar, but they're really working at it. So it's being able to be that destination for even more products than they've been in the past. And that's saying every liquor store turns into a convenience store or grocery, but being able to have a little bit wider assortment, I think, is really going to spell the difference here.
John, Kaylee, we have one more question before the
Yep.
time's up. Scott asks, with the downward overall trends, even RTD total volume, there must be massive pressure against startups who face higher production costs.
I
Yeah.
think I
Oh,
think
go
that's
ahead.
spot on. That's definitely something that we're hearing from some of the smaller emerging brands, and likely why we're seeing some of those declining UPC trends as well, because they're just not able to maintain that placement on shelf if they're not achieving those volume measures when it comes to production. Because we know it's hard to get margin on a lot of those RTD products, and in some cases, it's a little bit of a pay to play if you're not achieving certain volume targets.
Yeah,
Yes.
you're right. And this is why test and learn is so important. So if you get out into the retail space and can make a point about what the product differentiation is, that's what retailers want to see. They want to understand what that incremental profile is really going to be for that product.
One more question. How have Delta 9 beverages impacted and influenced RTDs? It's the last question of the day.
We get that one a lot, don't we, Kaylee?
Yeah, we can't get through a presentation without it. And I see who asked the question, so we know it's a great one. Um, there's definitely an influence. I think it's hard for us to quantify at this time just because of where they're legally able to be sold and stuff. But that's one that we're exploring a little bit more on, understanding what we can track. Um, but it's another option for a lot of consumers when they walk into a liquor store to have sort of an intoxicating or, a little bit of an altering beverage.
Yeah, good point.
Well, thank you, John and Kaylee, for an exciting webinar. This is the most attended webinar we've had all year. But
Good.
before we close, I want to remind you of some upcoming Discus events, webinars, and resources. As of last week, applications are open for 2025 Discus Academy leadership programs. They are year-long for rising leaders, executive leaders, and a woman focused program. And then September 18th webinar, we have the Small Business Association programs and grants to support small business global expansion. If that's something of interest, please register now. And if you'd like more information about, the webinar and what John and Kaylee have talked about, their contact information is here, but this information will go out in a post email along with the actual recorded webinar. And if you have any questions for Discus or our team as well too, please email us at membership@distilledspirits.org. This concludes our webinar. And again, thank you for joining us today. You may disconnect.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Thanks, Caleb.